the plan as it's being brokered at the moment really makes no attempt to engage seriously with those underlying conditions, nor the importance of pursuing both accountability and, by extension, justice.
Now, the comments from Donald Trump followed an opening statement from Benjamin Netanyahu, in which the Israeli Prime Minister heaped praise on the US president.
At the beginning of the war, I promised to bring all the hostages home. Today, with the indispensable help, the determined and focused help, the unremitting help of President Trump and his team, and with the incredible sacrifice and courage of the soldiers of Israel, we are fulfilling that promise.
Well, the US president spoke shortly afterwards and hailed what he called an end to terror and death.
After 2 harrowing years in darkness and captivity, 20 courageous hostages are returning to the glorious embrace of their families, and it is glorious. 28 more precious loved ones are coming home at last to rest in this sacred soil for all of time. And after so many years of unceasing war and endless danger, today the skies are calm, the guns are silent, the sirens are still, and the sun rises on a holy land that is finally at peace, a land and a region that will live, God willing, in peace for all eternity.
Just a very brief extract from a typically lengthy, and it has to be said, rambling speech from Donald Trump to the Israeli parliament a little while ago. Let's talk to Aryeh Kovler, who's a writer and analyst in Jerusalem. Can you pick some of the really significant moments from that speech for us, please?
Well, the most significant message from the Trump speech, which happened a few times, was his continued insistence that the war was over. This is something that Netanyahu and the Israeli government hasn't really said to the public. They've been saying, the hostages are home. But that moment, that kind of official statement that from his point of view, the Gaza war is over, that's something that kind of is something that maybe Netanyahu has been a bit scared to say to the Israeli public. Within that, Trump kind of needling Netanyahu a little bit, saying, it was time to stop all the killing and killing. There's nothing more to do here. And this kind of sense of celebration that he is taking with him as he goes down to Egypt now.
Yeah, do you think in some ways, and I agree with you, that was repeated several times, wasn't it? Was it effectively a warning to Netanyahu, it is over, do not start anything again on my watch?
I mean, there's certainly an element of that in there, for sure. I mean, the atmosphere was very positive, very friendly, lots of jokes, little dig to Netanyahu that, you're not in a war anymore. You should be nice to the opposition leader, Yair Lapid. Whereas, in fact, they're not being in a war anymore might mean the opposite, the return to a nastier politics. Trump also calling for Netanyahu to be pardoned from his criminal trial, asking the president of Israel to pardon him. But I do think that there was this message here, which is, this is my achievement, this ceasefire, don't mess it up.
Yes, I mean, he did say that Netanyahu was one of the greatest wartime prime ministers, and the charges against him, in Trump's words, amounted to just a few cigars and a bit of champagne, and let's just leave it. How did that go down with the audience?
Well, the Knesset was sort of packed with essentially supporters of the government. The gallery, the people in charge of allocating the gallery gave out a lot of tickets reportedly to Likud vote bundlers and people who are going to be needed in potentially a Likud primary if Israel is heading for elections. That might be a sign that elections are closer than people might have thought. And so there were lots of cheers anytime he said anything popular about the government or anything nice about Netanyahu.
Right, which is a contrast to what was going on outside, where I gather at some points the public address system had to remind people that this whole occasion in these public spaces was about honouring Donald Trump, not being incredibly rude about the elected Prime Minister.
Well, yes. I mean, the people who have been most active on the streets calling for the release of the hostages have also, not at first actually, but over the last 2 years, become very critical of the Israeli government. There's certainly a sense that Netanyahu had to be dragged kicking and screaming into this deal by Trump. And so they're very grateful to him and very angry at Netanyahu.
And what was said in that speech by Donald Trump about the Palestinians, if anything?
I didn't talk about them very much. He did say that Gaza needs to be rebuilt, and that the Gazans have been living in a bad way for some decades now, referencing the kind of Hamas leadership there, and that there should be a better life for them. There was, the kind of nods towards Palestine. There wasn't the kind of explicit head-banging, strong support of a two-state solution that would have isolated and gone down badly, maybe even led to some boos to Trump had he gone down that route. But the kind of more general fluffy talk around Gaza peace in the lead up to the Sharm summit, that was something that was understood, I think, by some in the room as kind of being that nod towards a two-state thing. And we saw this interesting thing. Netanyahu announced a few hours ago, and then he got a formal invite from the Egyptian President al-Sisi that he was going to go to the Sharm summit after all. And then after about an hour, suddenly that was all off. He changed his mind. He's too busy. There's the Jewish festival. It's not going to work. And that was because there was a bit of a backlash inside his coalition amongst his more right-wing partners that this conference was a bit too pro-Gaza, a bit too pro-two-state solution, and he couldn't be seen to be involved.
Right, which is an illustration, if we needed one, that the road ahead is not particularly easy, and the solution to the very many problems not clear at all.
No, even this afternoon, there's a new wrinkle. The next stage of transfers of hostages was supposed to be actually the bodies of hostages that Hamas have been holding for the last 2 years. They're supposed to give back a reasonable number of those today. Supposedly, they're saying they could only find 4 today. That's a lot less than Israel had been led to believe would be handed back today. And now there's kind of urgent talks going on about what this means for this current tranche of prisoner releases. There's a lot of challenges ahead, and they're already starting.
And as for Palestinian representation at this summit in Egypt, who is there?
Well, no one was invited initially. Notably, no Israeli, no Palestinian representation, no Hamas, no Palestinian Authority. But over the last, I think it was about 48 hours, Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority, managed to get an invite, essentially managed to invite himself there. Still no Hamas. And that was a kind of a big diplomatic move. I believe he's already there on the ground in Sham. And that's partly the reason I think that we saw a move by Netanyahu to try and go before he realized the backlash that would cause.
Right. So how confident are you on a scale of 1 to 10 that something really solid is going to come out of these conversations in Egypt, bearing in mind that there is no direct Israeli representative there, or certainly not that we're aware of, and certainly not the Prime Minister, and nobody from Hamas or affiliated to it?
Well, I mean, this is supposed to be about the future of Gaza. Obviously, it has a broader regional meaning too. These conferences, they normally take months to pull together. They have pre-meetings. They have, what they call precons, preparatory conferences, which are full of the people they call Sherpas, kind of diplomats who do all the kind of nitty-gritty negotiations, so they can leave only a few big questions and some signings on the table. This isn't that. This whole thing was pulled together in 2 or 3 days. I assume it's basically going to be a pep rally, for want of a better word, to try and get some energy around a future for Gaza. And everyone's celebrating and clapping and saying, oh, isn't it great that there's a ceasefire? Well done, Donald Trump. The likelihood that there's going to be anything concrete out of it is very small, but perhaps it could be the start of a more substantive process.
Well, let's all hope so. Thank you very much for your time. Aryeh Kovler, who's a writer and an analyst, and he was joining us from Jerusalem. Dr. James Smith is an emergency care doctor who's worked in Gaza. He is a lecturer in humanitarian studies at University College London. Dr. Smith, it's impossible to think about the situation in Gaza without pondering on what the priorities should be to try to help people who've gone back to what remains of their homes. What do they need first?
What we're talking about here is a state of total and complete destruction. And the footage that we've seen of people returning to Gaza City and the north of Gaza in particular in the last couple of days reveals, as we've seen repeatedly over the course of the last 2 years, the complete destruction of residential neighborhoods. In places there is literally nothing standing. We're talking about people's most basic needs simply to survive from one day to the next. I think it's really important that we emphasize that while the direct military violence from Israel may have stopped, the conditions that have been imposed, the conditions of life intended to bring about the destruction in whole or in part, still stand. We're talking about tens of thousands of people who are severely, acutely malnourished. They need specialist nutritional supplements in order to survive. The entire healthcare system has been targeted and systematically undermined, and a healthcare workforce, of course, that is exhausted beyond comprehension, physically and emotionally and psychologically.
Forgive me if you don't know I don't want to interrupt you because I know you've got first-hand experience of this, but is there a working water supply? Does the sewage system work?
Absolutely everything that is required for basic sort of societal functionality has been undermined. The water and sanitation systems were extremely fragile under the conditions of occupation and have been targeted. Many of your listeners may recall footage, particularly harrowing footage from Rafah last year, where Israeli soldiers filmed themselves blowing up the water and sanitation, one of the main water and sanitation systems in Rafah. So the infrastructure has been destroyed. In the short term, that will require effectively trucking of clean water, such that we can stave off the spread of waterborne diseases, which is widespread at the moment. Refuse, of course, piling up everywhere because there's no functioning waste disposal system. Agricultural and food security systems, livelihoods, of course, completely decimated, olive groves destroyed. OCHA, the UN Office for the High Commissioner for Humanitarian Affairs, have prepared with Palestinian organizations and Palestinian civil society a 60-day plan. And effectively what we're seeing there is just a long list of all of the most basic requirements that must be covered. For most of us, it's impossible to comprehend. More than 600,000 school-aged children that have been denied access to education for 2 years. Back in January, the World Health Organization estimated that $10 billion would be required for health system recovery alone. Of course, that number will have doubled now, given that the violence continued. Huge needs, not only in the short term, but over the long term as well.
And of course, we do need to be mindful that there is still violence on the ground in Gaza. Reports of clan warfare, for example, a particular disagreement between Hamas and a family who play some significant role in a clan in the Gaza Strip. I mean, that poses a very real danger to the civilian population as well, doesn't it?
I mean, the violence hasn't stopped. We have to be aware that there are several proxies that Israel itself has admitted arming over the course of the last 2 years. There are various proxies that are operating still inside Gaza. And of course, violence manifests beyond direct military violence. So while the drones may have stopped momentarily, while the naval vessels and the warplanes aren't firing onto Gaza, violence manifests in its structural form. And this is a really important issue for us to engage with, perhaps as a segue from the last interviewer. We're talking about a peace plan here, so-called peace plan, and yet the underlying conditions of occupation, of apartheid, of what many people, sociologists, genocide experts, and so on, have referred to as slow genocide, these foundational underlying conditions haven't been addressed. And the plan as it's being brokered at the moment really makes no attempt to engage seriously with those underlying conditions, nor the importance of pursuing both accountability and, by extension, justice. And these are really foundational issues if we want to take seriously the pursuit of peace.
Thank you very much. That is the view of Dr. James Smith, who was an emergency care doctor who has worked in Gaza.